Most runners are making these 5 mistakes and they have no idea it's slowing them down. I'm a sports scientist, physiotherapist, and former professional triathlete, and I've helped thousands of runners run faster with less effort. And trust me, you might be doing everything right, putting in the miles, pushing through the hard workouts, but if you're making any of these 5 mistakes, you're holding yourself back. So in this video, I'm going to show you what those mistakes are and how to fix them so you can start running faster with the same effort. Maybe even less. And one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on was thinking that running form starts at the feet. It's actually the arms. We'll get to why in a moment, and I'll show you a very cool exercise, but first, let's just quickly talk about those feet. Imagine you're riding a bike, but instead of pedaling smoothly, then every time you hit the bottom of the stroke, you push as hard as you can. It feels powerful, but what you're really doing is just jamming the brakes, making the ride inefficient and exhausting. And that is exactly what's happening when you overstride when you're running. Most runners reach their feet out in front of their hip instinctively, thinking that a longer stride will make them run faster. But in reality, every time your feet are landing out in front of your hips, you're creating a braking force and a lot of impact on your knees and your hips that can lead to injury. So how do you fix it? You want to land with your feet as close to your center of mass as possible. Or put another way, you want your feet to land right underneath your body or right underneath your hips. A simple way to do this is something that you've probably heard 1,000 times before, but let this be the one time that you actually take action on it and do something, and that is to increase your steps per minute. This will naturally shorten your stride and make you more efficient. Another way to do this, and a simple cue that worked for me that you can try on your very next run, is to imagine that your feet are landing behind you. When your feet hit the ground, think about pulling it back as soon as possible. Here's a side-by-side comparison of overstriding versus the ideal foot placement. Notice how the correct form keeps the momentum moving forward instead of fighting against it. But even if you fix your overstriding, if your alignment is off, then you're still wasting energy. I'm going to show you how to fix that in a moment, but first we need to talk about that arm swing. And that brings me to mistake number 2. Poor arm mechanics. I used to be the head coach of running for what's called age groupers in my local triathlon club, and every time we started the season, I would have them do this one exercise. I wanted to see if they could move their arms slower than their feet when they were running. Next, I wanted to see if they could move their arms faster than their feet when they were running. And guess what? All of them could not do it. It was extremely hard. You see, we have such ingrained movement patterns that when we try to move our arms faster, then our feet just follows. Keeping that in mind, if you want to increase your cadence or your steps per minute, then start with the arms. Try to move them faster and you'll see your feet will follow. But there's one more thing about the arms. Think of a tightrope walker. If their arms flail wildly or they cross the midline, then they're going to spend a ton of energy just to keep their balance. But when their arms are controlled and move with purpose, they stay steady and move efficiently. The same principle applies to running. Most runners either swing their arms too wide or go across the midline, throwing them off balance and just making them slower. Instead, your arms should be working with you and not against you. So to fix this, keep your elbows at around a 90-degree angle, maybe even a bit steeper, and then move them from your hip to your lip, or from your pocket to your waist. A lot of runners also carry unnecessary tension in their hands and their shoulders. To fix this, imagine that you're holding a potato chip between your fingers. You must not crush that potato chip, but you can't lose it either. Here's an example of a great arm swing. Now, even with a proper arm swing, most runners will end up getting injured because they do this very improper thing with their knees. But before I show you that, you first need to have the correct alignment when you're running. So you've probably heard the phrase run tall, which in my opinion is a bit too hard to conceptualize because what does running tall even mean? So here's how I like to think about it. Imagine pushing a shopping cart standing straight up or even leaning a bit back, it would be like twice as hard to keep it moving forward. But if you lean just slightly, then the cart will just move for you, and all you have to do is just to keep up. The same principle applies to running. If you're completely upright or even leaning a bit back, then you're fighting against gravity and you're making it so much harder for yourself. And that is a common mistake that absolutely kills your speed and slows you down. So instead of doing that, you want to maintain a slight forward lean, but not from the waist, from the ankles. Think of it like falling into your stride. A great way to train this is to stand up straight and then lean forward until you feel the urge to take a step with one of your legs. Just at that tipping point is where you want to maintain your form when you're running. Here's an example of the ideal forward lean. But even if you have the perfect form, it doesn't even matter if you keep making the same mistake that most runners make, which is to run the same route or the same 10 kilometers each and every week. And I'm going to show you what to do instead. But first, let me just quickly show you how to fix a common mistake that most runners make with their knees, and it has crushed more dreams than I can count. So, like we talked about earlier, you don't want to do an overstride. But when I had my own clinic and I would have people in for running form analysis, I always saw the same mistake whenever we fixed that overstride and they started to land underneath their body. And the best way for me to explain it is for you to imagine that you are about to jump off a small ledge, but when you land, then you lock your knees. The impact would send a jolt through your body. It would probably be painful and also very inefficient. But if you bend your knees slightly, then your legs work like springs and then you absorb the force. The same thing happens when you run. If you're landing with a locked knee, which is what so many runners do, then you are creating a force up through that joint and you're going to get injured. And even if we look aside from that, then it slows you down. Instead, you should aim to land with a slightly bent knee. This helps your muscles work more efficiently and basically just makes you faster. Strengthening your glutes and your hamstrings or the backside of your legs can be very helpful here, because if they are weak, then your knees will probably take the impact. Here's what an optimal slightly bent knee looks like. As I mentioned, if you keep running the same 10K or the same routes each and every time you go for a run, then you're slowing yourself down. So let me show you what to do instead. So when I started running, I would run the same 7 kilometers. It was a route from my parents' house and then up to my grandparents' house and around and then back home. And I would run that route every single time and I would try to beat my personal best every single time. And I would actually get better over time. So I thought this was the way to go. But I didn't realize that there's so many things wrong with this approach. I was doing what a lot of runners do, which is go out and do the same moderate paced effort, because when you're running at that pace, and if you do it often, then you can't go all out, but you're not running easy either. So you're sort of in that middle gray zone. But without variation, you're limiting your progress. So the fix is very simple. You need to mix up your training, and you need to do it with everything. So the surface, if you run uphill, downhill, straight ahead, if you're running in a forest, if you're running on a track, you need to push your body. You need to do things that you are not accustomed to for your body to improve. So here's a simple weekly breakdown you can use to balance your training. Do 1 easy run per week for recovery and base endurance. Do 1 tempo run that should be controlled but challenging. Do a long interval workout with intervals of 3 to 5 minutes each. Something like a 4x4 minutes all out with a 3-minute break works great. Then do a speed session with all out max sprints or hill sprints. And then do a long run of 90 minutes to 2 hours. Training like this helps you develop different energy systems and make you a more efficient runner. So to run faster than 99% of people, just fix the following. 1. Stop overstriding. Land under your hips. 2. Fix your arm swing and use your arms to control your pace and your steps per minute. 3. Lean slightly forward and let gravity help you. 4. Avoid extending or locking your knees. Land with a slight bend. And 5. Mix up your training with easy runs, long runs, medium runs, and speed work. But if you really want to maximize your speed, then check out this video where I'll show you a complete 50-day protocol that'll make you run faster with less effort.